As Space Marines have grown in popularity, it's easy to forget that these warriors come from a grim, dark universe. There is a lot of horror and terror attached to an Astarte, and that's what we're going to talk about today as I tell you two horrific stories of what it's like to be a Space Marine in Warhammer 40K. If you guys are new to the channel, subscribe. We're going to be posting scary stories throughout October to celebrate Halloween, and today we're focusing on Space Marines. Let's get into the first story of what it's like for a Space Marine to succumb to Nurgle. Brother Calix knelt in the shrine, the dull light of the flickering candles casting long shadows across his weathered face. The armor of his chapter, a once vibrant blue, had long since lost its sheen. His once proud helm sat at his side, and his gauntleted hands clutched a worn Aquila in silent prayer. The echoes of the last battle still rang in his ears. The servants of Nurgle had fallen before them in droves, yet it had been a hallowed victory. Calix could not forget the unnatural stench that clung to the battlefield, a reek that even his armor's air filtration system couldn't mask. Something had been wrong. His brothers had said as much. Some had complained of strange dreams, of whispers in the wind. His eyes, heavy with fatigue, fluttered close for but a moment, and that's when he felt it. A tickle at first, something crawling beneath his skin. He rubbed his forearm where the itch began, only to find it growing worse. He winced, gripping hard. His flesh felt soft, unnaturally soft. With a hiss, Calix stood.
"What is this?"
His voice rasped, and it was only then that he realized how dry his throat was. His vision swam as he stumbled to the dim mirror across the shrine's chamber, and his heart clenched at the reflection staring back at him. His face was gaunt, pale, but worst of all, dark veins crept beneath the surface of his skin, bulging as if though something was moving underneath them. He staggered back, his power armor feeling like a tomb. He could feel the bloat within his body, a grotesque pressure swelling in his stomach. The crawling sensation intensified, now spreading to his neck, his chest, his legs. He reached for his bolter, but found his fingers barely able to close around the grip. His strength, his purity was failing. He looked at his arm. His flesh had turned to a sickly green, his muscles slacking away from the bone. Calix gasped, stumbling backwards, his back colliding with the wall, and from his throat escaped a guttural wheeze. His organs felt as if they were liquefying inside him, his very blood betraying him. He gagged, his breath a thick, rancid vapor.
"Emperor protect."
But even the words felt hollow. A vile, wet cough erupted from him, spraying phlegm and bile onto the shrine floor. The pain was unbearable, and yet beneath it, a strange numbness was spreading. His mind, once sharp and disciplined, began to fog. His legs buckled and he collapsed onto his knees, bile leaking from his mouth as his body convulsed. That's when whispers filled his ears.
"Brave warrior."
The voice slithered in his mind, heavy and grotesque. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a rasping groan. His body twisted and writhed, his flesh transforming. The bloat he had felt was spreading, warping, reshaping him. His armor, once a symbol of his honor, cracked and split to accommodate his swelling mass.
"You are not my master."
He groaned through broken teeth. The voice laughed, a deep, revolting chuckle that sent shivers down his decaying spine.
"Nurgle welcomes you, child. Resist if you must, but in time, you will beg for his gifts."
His vision blurred, and the weight of his soul became unbearable. He could feel the filth overtaking him, his body succumbing to the unnatural plague. His power armor creaked, no longer able to contain his bloated form. His muscles quivered as they turned to sludge, his bones cracking and reforming in grotesque new shapes. His mind, however, fought with every ounce of his strength. He could not give in. He would not. But the whispers grew louder, the pain sharper.
"Why fight, brother? In death, you shall serve with us. Embrace the rot. Embrace the decay. You will never be alone in the gardens of Nurgle."
His teeth cracked as he gritted them, bile seeping from his mouth. His skin split in patches, revealing festering wounds beneath them. The Aquila he once held clattered to the floor, dissolving in the spreading filth that now poured from his body. Through fading vision, he saw his reflection one last time in the broken shards of his helm's visor. A monstrous figure stared back, a swollen, diseased parody of an Astarte. His eyes, once burning with the light of the Emperor, were now dull and milky, consumed by sickness. His lips cracked into a rictus grin, not of his own will, but that of another. The whispers became a chorus.
You are ours, brother. You are ours.
His soul screamed in silence as he finally fell to the rot. In the darkness, there was only laughter. Now, when you think of a Space Marine in the context of an Imperial citizen or even a cultist, it's easy to see how terrifying it would be to run into one of these massive warriors. And that's what the second story is going to talk about. Let's get into it. The shadows of Hyph Tikal loom like the twisted remains of a dead civilization. It was late, far past the curfew imposed by the local Arbites, and the air was thick with a suffocating heat. Beneath the sprawling industrial pipes, rusted towers, and abandoned manufactorums, something hunted. Davin Barris ran. His ragged breath echoed in the dark, his heart pounding with a rhythm that threatened to burst from his chest. He clutched a small blood-stained icon of the Emperor to his chest, though his faith had long since crumbled. Davin was a cultist now, not of the Emperor, but the ruinous powers. He had fallen for the dark promises whispered in the hidden alcoves of the Underhive, promises of power, salvation, and the release from the crushing oppression of the Imperium. But that promise had turned into a nightmare. The Space Marine was still following him. He'd heard the stories, of course, all of them had, how the Astartes, those superhuman angels of death, could tear through entire regiments with ease, how they were relentless, merciless, killing machines forged by the Emperor's will. But hearing the stories and being hunted by one were two different things. He had seen it up close, a hulking giant clad in midnight black power armor, with a sigil of a white raven etched into his pauldron. The helm bore a skull-like visage, with eyes that gleamed with cold, pitiless light. Davin's comrades had fallen quickly. They hadn't stood a chance. His mind flashed back to the carnage, the rapid burst of bolter fire that turned bodies into pulp, the snap of a lightning claw as it seared through the flesh and bone. He remembered the wet sound of the bodies hitting the ground. They weren't rebels. They were insects squashed under the heel of a god-made flesh. But somehow he had escaped. He could still hear the distant thud of the Astartes' heavy footsteps, a predator drawing closer with every second. They were slow, methodical, like a beast savoring the chase. The cultist's mind raced with fear. He had prayed to the dark gods, begged for their intervention, but they were silent. Their gifts, the small fragments of warp-blessed powers he had tasted, were useless here. The abandoned refinery loomed ahead. Rusted scaffolding and massive defunct cognitators offered little cover, but Davin scrambled toward them anyways, desperate to lose himself in the maze of steel and debris. He ducked beneath the shattered vent and crouched in the darkness, his breathing shallowed. The thudding steps stopped. Davin froze, pressing his back against the cold, metallic wall. Silence. For a moment, he dared to hope that the Space Marine had lost him. Suddenly a sound. A soft rasp, like metal scraping against stone. Davin's eyes widened as he glanced upward. A huge figure descended from the shadows above, landing with an unnatural grace for something so massive. The skull-faced helm glared down at him, and before he could scream, a gauntleted hand shot forward, clamping around his throat. Davin was lifted effortlessly from the ground, his feet kicking in the air. His entire body trembled as he gazed into the cold, unfeeling lens of the Astarte.
Heretic.
The Space Marine's voice was a deep, rumbling growl. It vibrated through Davin's skull, drowning out his thoughts.
You have been found wanting in the Emperor's sight.
The cultist choked, gasping for air as the grip around his throat tightened.
I renounce the dark gods, please. I swear it. I was deceived, tricked.
The Marine said nothing. His grip remained steady, his silence far worse than any words. The faint glow from his helm lens bore into Davin's soul.
For your sins, there can be no forgiveness.
The Space Marine's voice as cold as the void.
Our faith in the dark gods has sealed your fate. They will not save you.
Davin's eyes bulged as his mind fractured, trying to comprehend the inescapable truth. There was no salvation, not from the Emperor, nor from the gods of chaos. Only death. With a sickening snap, the Marine crushed Davin's throat. His body went limp, and the Space Marine let it fall unceremoniously to the ground. The cultist's eyes remained open, frozen in eternal terror. The Space Marine stood over the corpse for a moment, then reached down to retrieve the bloodstained icon of the Emperor. He wiped it clean, observing the small tarnished relic between his gauntleted fingers.
There is only the Emperor,
He muttered, turning to disappear into the shadows once more. The hunt would continue. And those are just 2 stories highlighting the grim darkness of a Space Marine. If you guys enjoyed these 2 stories and you want to see more, tell me down in the comment section below and subscribe to the channel. The Sound Alchemist has already posted 2 scary stories, so check those out. There's going to be a playlist, and I hope you guys are enjoying this content. We will talk tomorrow. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.